would you like to quickly introduce yourself, what you do, and why you're here?
Sure, yeah. My name is Yat, chairman, co-founder of Animoca Brands. We're probably best known for, I guess, metaverse and gaming and tokenization in that area. Back like when we started doing this in 2017 with CryptoKitties and then OpenSea and Sandbox and Axie Infinity. But today, actually, we're probably one of the largest investors in crypto, over 628 portfolio companies, and very heavily focused on the tokenization of pretty much everything. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but we think of tokenization as essentially that essential layer for sort of agent-to-agent communication, which we think is a real future here.
Well, thank you for sharing. For those who do not know me, maybe a quick introduction of myself. I'm based out of Hong Kong. I do direct investment out of MaGE Group, mainly early stage technology startup with a core focus in India. You might wonder why, but I do have a deep connection to the country because this is where my husband's from. And indirectly, I am a partner of two VC funds called True Global Ventures, total AUM over $280 million US, and we are the early backer of Animoca Brands and the Sandbox, which is why I do have a deep connection with Animoca. And so today's the topic is IP tokenization. Is that the end of the world for Spotify, YouTube, or even Netflix? Interesting topic, but tell me in a very simple word, sentences. For those who don't know what is IP tokenization, what is that? What the hell is that?
So, I think the simplest way to think of tokenization broadly, regardless of whether it's IP or any other kind of real-world asset, really it's simply basically wrapping whatever asset there is into a digital format, basically secured through blockchain, represented as a token. And because it's on a blockchain, it's verifiable. And so the verifiability is really critically important. Just take a look at things like stablecoins. Stablecoins are something that you can use all over the world. You don't need a bank, you don't need an intermediary, you don't need permission per se, and you can literally just transfer it digitally from someone in Africa, someone in Hong Kong, someone in America, without an intermediary. And because it's on blockchain, you can validate the fact that it is a true US dollar to the extent that you trust USDC or USDT or whatever type of currency that's out there, or a regulated stablecoin that's out there. And I think this to me is where we're all so digital, but it's interesting how our payment rails and our transaction layer are actually abstractions, because we're still using banking systems and traditional systems that actually create a barrier towards that. Right? And so this is basically native money, native digital money, native digital assets. Just quickly on IP tokenization. So a lot of people, when they talk about RWAs, the distinction is they think of real world, like the dollar or real estate or maybe gold, and those are RWAs. But I would argue on RWAs, when you say real world assets, we were probably most known for tokenizing video game assets initially, right? Like virtual land, like skins and NFTs and so on, which by the way is still a $300 million a month sales asset a month. What's interesting is that when you ask your children, or basically gamers, they don't think of a video game item as not real. In their mind, it's entirely real. So in a way, I would say that RWAs essentially were already sort of existing with the virtual assets, because the virtual assets, even though they're virtual, actually express themselves real to a lot of people. And then when we talk about IP tokenization, it's much the same. Because an IP isn't tangible in the sense that you can hold it. Right? An IP is essentially a virtual construct that was a patent or a trademark or invention or some kind of right that basically became sort of tangible as an asset class in a tokenized format, but is also entirely virtual. And yet we still define IP rights as real world, when in fact it is just as virtual as a video game item.
In general, for YouTube or for Spotify and even Netflix, their business model, they charge you monthly subscription fee. They pay minimum to the content creators. In the creatives industry, it's very tough because you always hope to be one day famous so that you can really monetize your own IP, your content, your creative content, right? From IP tokenization, what are the real benefits? But always there are pros and cons, right? But what are the drawbacks also from your perspective?
Yeah, so first, let's talk a little bit about why those platforms have so much power, and then we can, and then how tokenization will solve that. So the reason why these platforms are so powerful is because they own the distribution, right? So if you're a musician and you want to have music be basically distributed, you must have distribution. And Spotify is the path to distribution. If you don't have that distribution, nobody will listen to your music, you can't be famous or you can't be recognized, and that's it. So you're willing to basically give them almost everything. And that's true for Netflix too. I think the creator of Squid Games famously made like just a few $1 million on an asset that essentially is worth effectively, basically a billion dollar franchise to Netflix. He got paid a little bit more for the sequel, but still, at the end of the day, it was very small. And again, it's because they own the distribution rails. What tokenization does, it allows as a way of fundraising, because you can basically maybe fractionalize the asset. It also allows a way in which you can have more group participation, but that doesn't solve it in itself, right? I think in the early days of Web3, you were able to sort of invest and participate in these ecosystems, but that alone wasn't enough. It just gave more money and more value in a shared way, but it still didn't solve distribution. And now, after we've built all sort of the infrastructure for Web3 and blockchain, now actually we think the path of where this is all going to change, where it's going to be the change or the end of these platforms, as we have been hoping to see because they've been taking all the data and the value, is through agentic AI. And so what I mean by that is that they own the distribution because you go there to Netflix to watch the content. You go to Google and you read the content. You go to Spotify to download the music. But with an agentic AI, you're not going to go anywhere. It's going to come to you. So the distribution layer completely changes. And we've had these moments in history before. The smartphone is one such example, right? When the smartphone came about, it completely changed the distribution rails and appended entire businesses and created new opportunities. And with AI agents, we're in that moment again, right? So the Web3 technology created the layer, the infrastructure. However, it didn't solve distribution, right? Agentic AI will solve that. So an example, I mean, all of you are probably using Google for search. Are you now clicking through to the website that Google search gives you, or are you just looking at the summary that Gemini Pro gives you? The summary. Most of you are just looking at the summary. And this is visible already across websites complaining how they are saying, I'm not getting enough advertising revenue. So this is already happening. But what worked so powerfully about OpenAI with ChatGPT was that they created an interface that we're all familiar with. So we launched a product called Animoca Minds just a week and a half ago, just when the whole OpenClaw thing was going out. And OpenClaw, for those of you who are not familiar, is essentially an AI agent that runs on your desktop and pretty much does everything for you. It's not as crazy as people say it is. But what's powerful about OpenClaw is it's really demonstrated sort of what an agent can truly do. And Animoca Minds is essentially a complete cloud version of that, but not using OpenClaw. And you don't have to access your WhatsApp and all your private messages and private photos in order to interact. It can actually sort of work on it from the cloud. And what was interesting to experience that is that most users had difficulty dealing with what we call a mind because they were not used to the interface. They were expecting to tell it something and it should come back. It wasn't sort of realizing that they were sort of dealing with a coworker almost, right? And that's because, when you think about OpenAI and ChatGPT, it was just a better search. They just go in, search, you get output, then you walk away. ChatGPT doesn't come to you and say, how about this, how about that? It's not working with your workflow. It's not accessing your calendar. It's not sort of giving you more optimizations. It's not in your life. It's only there when you want it. It's not actually part of what you do on an everyday sort of cycle. And that's basically what agentic AI will do. And the reason why I think this will change is because the web as we know will completely go away. HTTP, which is sort of the standard for the web, is going to go away in place of MCP. And I say this because just as you're no longer getting content from, you're using Gemini Pro to just get you all the summary details, the AI agent is going to deliver it directly to your inbox, whether it's on your WhatsApp, whether it's on Telegram, whether it's on your email. And you're no longer going to read South China Morning Post or the New York Times by going to the website. It's going to be delivered straight to you by the agent. And so how do media partners get paid? They get paid basically on the back end. So there's an explosion now of these MCP servers that are coming out. And so when you pay a subscription, what will happen at the end, the MCP servers are the ones that are dealing with the payment rails on the back. And that's how content creators are going to get paid. And the best mechanism for this is a token infrastructure. So the AI agent is going to be negotiating with other providers for the content and exchange value in tokens. We don't need to know any of it. We just get the value. Blockchain runs on the back, scales. And blockchain wasn't scalable to do that 5 years ago or 6 years ago. You know, when CryptoKitties came out, $40 million of sales broke Ethereum. It couldn't work. And now you can do billions and billions of transactions real time without any problems. And that infrastructure is now ready. And this, we think, is going to be the change because the distribution has now changed. If the agent is delivering stuff to you all the time, then you no longer depend on Netflix and Spotify and Google. It just comes to you. And that is the opportunity to basically sort of have this new era of distribution through agentic AI.
Your platform sounds amazing. We were in the speaker room talking about it. I'm going to give it a try. Can you repeat the domain name again?
Yeah, it's just animocaminds.ai, as in the head, sort of the mind. Or you can go to aminds.ai if you want to do something sort of, but either way, both of them work. What we try to do here is make it as simple as possible. You just put in your email, and the AI will send you an email and basically welcome you. That's it. And the whole idea is it should talk to you in the interface that you're already dealing with. In other words, we don't want you to go to a website. We want you to enter your life where you are already at. And so you can also link to your Telegram. WhatsApp is a bit more problematic because Facebook doesn't like AI agents hanging around doing stuff in WhatsApp because they want to promote their own stuff, which is the challenge of centralization. But Telegram, sort of Messenger will work soon as well, and of course email as well.
So the platform will have access to my personal schedule,
If
personal
you give it permission.
preferences.
Yes.
How about my personal privacy? How can you ensure your platform can safeguard my personal privacy?
Yeah, so the reason why it's safeguarding the personal privacy, it does have persistent memory, but it doesn't have access to everything unless you give it permission. So you give it permission to your calendar using OAuth, so it has access, has maybe read permission, but you can always remove it if you want to. Right, and that's actually the premise of big data ownership as well. It doesn't tap into all of your data unless you give access to it. How many of you actually here use OpenClaw? Okay, one person, right? But by the way, that is going to be the general average, right? A lot of people talk about OpenClaw and agentic AI because it demonstrated sort of, the potential. But to this day, there's maybe 100,000 people using OpenClaw. But there's millions and millions of agents that have been spawned out of it. Because you still need to be quite technical to set it up. It's not straightforward to do that. But the thing about OpenClaw is it basically takes all of your data, doesn't care anything about your privacy, really, frankly speaking, unless you restrict it. And then basically gives you insights about what you're doing. But it's basically segregated. It's on the cloud, so it's not actually in your desktop. That's how it protects it.
But back to reality, the market is shit right now. In the crypto space, you know that.
Oh, the general market's not doing so well.
It's horrible, right? So now, as a content creator, I'm an artist, I'm a singer. I want to be famous. I do sing songs. How can I really benefit from the IP tokenization? There are too many bad apples, many rug pull, pump and dumps. These type of bad apples really affected negatively to the market.
So, I mean,
what can I do? At the end of the day, it matters if we can bring bread and butter back home.
Of course,
right?
Of course, yeah. So, I mean, so the short-term tangible outcome is that what you can do with tokenization right now is you can basically turn your IP into an RWA. You can sell it on licensed platforms like Republic or Securitize or these kind of platforms that are regulated for this, and they're buyers for this type of product. That's on a very basic level. But you can also, and I think people underestimate this because they are not familiar with it, you can still sell into these communities if you're appealing to them. Right, I know that Bored Apes and Pudgy Penguins and so on have all sort of had sort of a negative image because the token prices have dropped and everything, but that audience still has value. If you're launching a product, that's how you essentially start with your first 1,000 true fans. The power of tokenization is for you to have a direct relationship with your consumer. So Kevin Kelly said this best, I think, in 2007 when he coined the phrase, 1,000 true fans. And what he meant by that was that if you're able to get your 1,000 true fans, they will have no problem paying you. Back then, he said 100 US. I think today it has to be a bit more because of inflation. But the principle is they will pay you 100 US a year, no problem. And then you have $100,000 a year. And from that, you build your base, right? And that's the beginning of fandom, right? And what the platforms have done is they've taken that away from you because you don't know who your 1,000 true fans are. Only they do. And you have to pay a tax to Instagram or Spotify or whatever platform so you can reach that. So when you launch a token, an NFT or whatever, it's not for the selling of it. It's for you to know who is actually your true fan that you can reach out. And from that basis, you're then able to sort of monetize that in different ways. It's not necessarily just the music. You can sell them stuff, appearances. They are the ones who will always pay money for your shows, whatever that may be. And really, it's about community, right? Every artist, every creator has to build his core community. And what the big platforms have done is they've taken your community to themselves, right? And what Web3 and blockchain does is it allows you to interact directly and own that from there. Doesn't mean it's not hard work, right? It doesn't mean that it's not like, I think when people talk about let's launch a token and there's some money involved, that wasn't true in 2018, 2019, 2020, right? The market just accelerated very quickly and frankly, was a bit of a bubble. And so people got the wrong idea. I tell this to people all the time about sort of, when we got into Sandbox, we acquired it for $4 million. At its peak, it was worth, I don't know, 16 billion, for a short moment in time. Was that realistic? So the point being, but it's still, an ecosystem, $1 billion ecosystem, that's pretty powerful, right? So what I'm saying is that it's all relative to where you look at the entry point. It's like if people look at Bitcoin as well, everyone's like, oh, Bitcoin's down, it's bad, it's like, $65,000. People forgot what Bitcoin was like even just 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, right? Zoom out on the macro picture, you can see where the trend is going.
We were the early backer of the Sandbox, so absolutely we got in when the valuation was very low. It was only 14 million US dollar, and we got in 10% in equity. So we were like really early stage back in 2019, invested in Sandbox, and saw the whole process and the NFT drive and everything. And I'm from Hong Kong, right? So seeing MTL, Ocean Park, many Hong Kong brands and so many different Gucci, Adidas, all these brands also joined the metaverse at that time. I think it was fabulous. And it was a very interesting, unique way of helping brands and creators gather together.
And gain attention.
Yes. So, I still have a lot of hope in Sandbox. And I heard they are planning to roll out a different version, mobile.
Yes,
right?
mobile's coming, Sandchain,
Yep.
a lot of Gen AI. I don't know how many of you have seen, one of the challenges that Sandbox had for the creators was it was not that easy to make a essentially environment that creators could build a setup. Because this was 2018, and up until, frankly, the Gen AI world-building models really only emerged, frankly, last year, right? In a meaningful manner. And if you've used something like Genie 3 from Google, you can now see where it's going to go, right? And so you can expect Sandbox to fully embrace that, which means that if you're a creator, I can now prompt my creations, and I can create a world that people can get into at relatively minimal cost. At the end of the day, the problem for Sandbox was it would still cost you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to create your virtual world. And if you're HSBC or if you're Standard Chartered, no problem. But if you're basically a creator, it's still difficult, right? And so what Sandbox did was they helped subsidize some of that. But the subsidies weren't sustainable over the long run, right? And now, because of Gen AI, you can basically sort of create that much, much faster. So the tooling will matter a lot as well. And again, it democratizes that access. And then what Sandbox does, and through the launch of Sandchain, is essentially bring customers to you, right? But of course, how do you create more content faster? And again, sort of Gen AI is a solve for that.
Yeah, I just helped Sanching organize the event back in December 16. That was 2 months ago. You were there also and talked
Absolutely.
about it. It was good. I like the model where it was almost free as content creator to join. It's free to join, and they
It is
give you
free.
a free .sen domain, and you can tap into the content creator community because they have a global, big, rich list of creators where you can really interact and see how you guys can work together and find ways to monetize
No,
their
absolutely.
IPs.
I think the problem we have in the creator economy today is that because there's not enough money for creators, it's become a tipping culture, right? And by tipping, I don't mean like restaurant tips. I mean things like Patreon, for instance, where support me and just pay me essentially a donation, a patronage of some form. And while that works to a certain extent, it's not sustainable over the longer term. That's the issue, right? Because the sustainability problem is that it's not a service you're receiving. You're doing it because you love the fan, or the fan loves you. But from a product standpoint, the demand isn't the utility itself, and that sometimes isn't sustainable, right? And the economic flywheel of the tipping culture has also problems because, for instance, when you look at YouTube, YouTube takes somewhere between 45 to 90 days to pay its creators.
That's
Right?
awful.
So now think about that, right? I mean, this is also the reason why people are talking about yield on stable coins and whatever. That float that basically Google makes on the money that's sitting there in the billions of dollars, essentially, sitting on treasuries or whatever it is that they're doing, or yield generation, belongs to Google. It ought to belong during that period of time to the creator, right? So what you can now do with something, on blockchain though, is you could finance that because the payment is guaranteed. And so maybe you have to pay a little bit of cost, like an interest for it. But for most creators, it's acceptable because the time value of essentially getting the money now is more valuable than waiting 90 days. It's not just about the interest, it's about the opportunity cost. Because often the opportunity cost is worth more than the 5 or 10%, right? Which anyway, the creator doesn't even pocket, right? So you can see how creators are being squeezed, not just in terms of the overall revenue share, but even on the yield that they're supposed to be making. They earn that money on day one, and they get paid on day 90, right? I mean, that is insane, right? And again, this will all change with blockchain.
I mean, it sounds quite positive based on how you describe it, but one key aspect we need to take into consideration is the regulatory challenges, right? So what do you foresee the regulatory challenges, especially in the creative space?
Well, I think it's much better than it was before, for sure, right? And you've got different countries that are now doing stablecoin regulations on a payment rail, which means it's easier for other countries around the world to also accept them as a payment form. Banks are soon going to be able to accept them once a regulation is in place. So all of that will basically change the payment sort of infrastructure. But the big one is, of course, on utility tokens, right? And so everyone's looking at the Clarity Act in the US as sort of that guiding principle. If you trust Polymarket, I think we're at 55% chance that it will pass in a bipartisan way. I think a lot of people thought that it would be much further along, because of politics, because of Trump, which has been a mixed bag for crypto. I think the Clarity Bill will still pass, but it probably will take a few more months for it to get into place, maybe Q2, where everyone's hoping for Q1, but maybe in Q2. What it means, though, is that once that is passed, you have the ability to launch a token very clearly understanding what is a security and what isn't. And that, to me, is going to create a massive change. Because then even companies big and small are going to all start launching tokens and creating infrastructure around it. So think about what will happen when a Google or a Facebook or Walmart or Microsoft all start launching tokens and some kind of blockchain. Some people say it's risky because that means they're going to create these corporate chains and they're going to be permissioned and they don't want it to be open. But of course, the other thing is that you're teaching people about blockchain and they're basically on-chain with their assets. They will want to move them around, and you can't really stop that. So from that vantage point, you're going to have millions and millions, actually billions of people onboarded into crypto once Clarity Act passes, because the largest corporation can now safely issue a token and can now safely launch their own blockchain. Facebook tried it with Libra, for instance, but they couldn't because they were shut down, because there was a structure, it wasn't clear what that was. With the Clarity Act, they know the parameters. And then you have a huge onboarding of people that are basically on the blockchain. And that, to me, is essentially where, for creators, you have an ability to tap into that as well, because now they can finance and they can purchase it in this manner.
As a general public, I'm an investor. I only care about investment opportunities. This is important, right?
Yeah.
So what are the, I mean, this is not financial advice as we speak.
Sure.
So what are the investment opportunities in this space, especially currently the market is shit?
Well, okay, so just quickly on the comment about markets are shit. It's macro, right? And it's because it's uncertainty. And while Trump is in office, the one thing we can be guaranteed on is volatility. Okay, right? However, one thing, the way we like to think about this is that, is the world going to be more digital? Are people going to go more online? Are we going to be more dependent on basically virtual stuff? And the short answer is very clearly yes, right? We're not going to stop using computers. We're not going to stop using AI. This is all accelerating, right? Which means the digital utility and the digital asset class is going to just explode over time, right? So it's just taking it from a long perspective. In terms of the opportunities, I mean, the way that we structure ourselves, the reason why we are going public is that we want to present ourselves as a way that can sort of steward the industry and essentially be an index for the industry, at least on the utility altcoin space. You can buy Bitcoin, or if you want to have exposure to Web3, then you could potentially, when we're public, also invest in Animoca. That's how we want to present ourselves, and that's how we think about it, because most people aren't going to just buy a token. I mean, you can, right? But they'd want to buy into a business that has the ability to sort of have broad exposure to the space. And this also, to us, is the mission about democratizing financial access. Because if you want access to these opportunities, you're a fund. TGV had the opportunity to invest in Sandbox at this valuation. But you're an accredited investor. You have relationships. And the people who can invest in TGV have to be at least of a certain sort of wealth class. Most of the world is not, right? How does a regular person invest in this opportunity? And this comes the next level, which is tokenization, which means now you can invest in a company, especially when it's tokenized, for a couple dollars, as opposed to minimum $50 or $100 or $200, which may not seem like a lot of money for people in this room, but it's a lot of money for most of the world.
Sounds good. Well, we're running out of time, I understand. But we talk a lot, appreciate it for sharing. But if we ask you to give us one key takeaway as a wrap up for the chat today, what would be the one key takeaway you will share with our audience today?
You really need to look into agentic AI. I mean, that's the key thing. Everything I talked about is amplified because of agentic AI. People will talk about Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. I don't know if you call it Web 4, but the agentic web is effectively the layer that can take advantage of everything that was built in Web 3 in a scale that is massive. We talked about digital identity, Mochaverse that we're building around that. And we believe that the number one use case for digital identity is not humans on chain, it's agents on chain. I know we're out of time, but I want to share a funny story, because when we launched a week and a half ago Animoca Minds, my chief business officer, Alan, had his AI send information to me about a product and some insight. And then he wrote back to him and said, this is what Yatsu said. And he said, that doesn't sound like Yat. And he sent me a separate message and said, have you been talking to my AI? And I said, no. It turned out that he was talking to another AI called Yatsu that was also mined. And he didn't know the difference. The AI didn't know the difference between the real AI, the real Yat, and the AI Yat. And how could he, right? There's no passport. He doesn't have sort of eyes in the classic sense. Like we take that for granted. This is where digital ID matters. If I'm going to transact with your AI and your AI, I need to know that he has permission. Yep. I need to know that Bowie is okay with this, or that it's a real Yat AI, right? Or that these 5 AIs are accredited by me, that it's not just some fake version of that. And we can see this today. OpenClaw has maybe 100,000 installations, 150,000, but there's like 10 million agents, right? So where do we need the ID system? I think it's going to be on the agentic side first before it's on the human side.
Well, thank you so much, Yada. As always, I always enjoy chatting with you on stage.